Today, we are discussing the cyber readiness of the manufacturing industry and why the biggest risks are not complex threats, but the basics that are left unmanaged. Welcome to another episode of Unscripted with SST, the LinkedIn live show where we deep dive into the real, unfiltered world of IT, cybersecurity, and business technology. Brought to you by SST, we are here to cut through the noise, share expert insights, and tackle the challenges shaping the future of managed IT services, live, raw, and unscripted. Today, we have Bo and Josh from Team SST joining the conversation. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good to be here.
Bo and Josh, they work directly with manufacturers who find themselves balancing the production demands with increasing cybersecurity expectations. Our discussion today will center around this topic, and more specifically, the critical topic that leadership is facing, and really that's like controlling what matters in cybersecurity. We'll kind of dive into some specific areas that need to be more focused. So I guess with that, we could just jump right into it, fellas.
Let's do it.
So I guess to kick this thing off, when organizations think about cybersecurity, the focus often goes to the advanced threats, but really what we're seeing in manufacturing environments is something quite different. We actually see, I mean, what are you guys seeing that is driving the risk today within that manufacturing space, aside from the advanced threats?
Yeah, I mean, there are some advanced threats out there. There's a lot of capabilities that bad actors have nowadays, especially with AI. But the same way that there's these, more sophisticated attacks, it's also so much easier to just flood all of the basic phishing campaigns, the simple cyber attacks out in the world. In what I've seen in my time in the industry, I would say it's more about having none of the basic controls in place. It's things like access review, account management, authentication controls, a lack of that stuff being done, and a combination of that, just a lack of security awareness training on top of it as well.
Yeah, that's good. So what we're saying is it's less about a missing tool to fulfill a certain type of or to reduce exposure to risk. It's more about just the environment being consistently managed, with discipline around, the things that you mentioned.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Every company has tools. Most every company has tools, and tools are great. Tools take care of things that automatically that we shouldn't have to worry about, but tools don't cover everything. And tools don't necessarily pick up the slack of everything that was in place before you put those tools in place. So there's a lot of drift and a lot of gaps that can be identified. And I would say most of the environments during an onboarding process that we've gone through, we've seen kind of similar issues in all of those environments of things not being in place.
Yeah, some of it too is just with how they're using the systems, right? It's that drift. What you're talking about is they're introducing additional tools. They're not necessarily set up. User workflow. Maybe they have access to some data or systems that they shouldn't have. That becomes part of their workflow. It's not audited, and suddenly there's just way more access. And with how they're using that is where that risk is being presented, rather than just like them having access.
Yeah, access and permissions, definitely a big one that I've noticed in pretty much every onboarding. I don't know many of our current clients, like every onboarding that we've done, I feel like we've identified some permissions where like users might not have even have known what they had access to, but like things aren't always. When's the last time you've gone through and reviewed your data in your file structure on-prem in your environment and verified, okay, this user has access to this file share, this folder. Many times over the years, these companies have this like a public drive or a public share or a main company share where they just kind of throw all of their data together over the years. And it starts over time. If you don't have standards in place, it starts to become like a jumbled mess, I would say. And again, over time, like people just get access to things that maybe they shouldn't have. And if that account gets compromised, bad actors potentially have access to those things, which is a problem.
And now too, it becomes so much more of a risk. When we talk all the time with our customers, everybody wants to use AI more, right? And there's significant value in using it more. It's just the risk out there without having those controls in place, just starting with, those access account controls, data protection, kind of the data governance stuff, who should have access to what, if that's not in place. Then you try to add those tools on there with how those tools use that data. That's a significant risk as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's really good perspective. I also just think, so you're, a little bit what we're, hitting on there is, maybe a little bit into this identity management space and the data governance space, but I try to make it as simple as possible. Like when we go into these new environments, there's no management of the user profiles in their base system. True statement?
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
What we see too is when we talk about legacy accounts, is there's an intentional decision, when they've had staff turnover, they kept an account on, for a period of time because they needed for this transition, and then they moved on and that account sits out there. And then somebody starts using that account because that account has the permissions that they need, but they've never fixed that user's permission. So then, it's not only security risk because there's another account being managed, but then it's a workflow cost associated with it too, because now this user has to do some extra work because their account can't do it. They got to use a different account, and so that's just, kind of where this accumulated risk over time really adds in. There's security risk. It's also the operational risk too.
Yeah, I feel along with that, especially growing SMBs, if you started as a smaller environment, if you have an onboarding or offboarding process for new employees coming in or exiting a company, when you're smaller, it can be kind of casual sometimes, and as you grow, if you don't get a good structured process in place for offboarding and onboarding of employees, that's where these things can get missed, where a year later, this account still exists in Active Directory and it has access to all these files on a share, and no one ever disabled it, no one ever signed out all the logins to the email inbox, stuff like that. That's just a threat that's just existing out in space that should have been cleaned up. It shouldn't even be worthy.
Yeah. I mean, I think of it's so much what we talk about all the time, right? It's discipline process. So the things that you just talked about that you guys do, we have a pretty extensive, kind of assessment process during onboarding to identify these users. That's not good enough. So that's a one-time thing. The discipline comes in, when you're once a month checking this user list or these user profiles. Who needs to be enabled? Who needs to be disabled? What do we need to remove? What do we need to delete? That is not done. And what is the cost of doing that? Next to nothing, right?
Yep. I feel nowadays having an inventory established, I feel we always relate things back to getting an inventory established, but it's so important. And of course, we do that during the onboarding process, but you kind of create this baseline of, all right, what are all your file structure that exists? Here are all your users. Let's just figure out from the get-go what they have access to, clean up the data, clean up the access, and then you can slowly work up from there. And getting that part in place, especially if your company thinking about starting to use AI more for your workflows, I think it's more important now than ever to clean up all of your existing data structure and permissions before getting any AI tools in place if you're planning on using them.
Yeah. And so I was just thinking too, right? We talk about just your general user, right? Office worker, machine floor worker, but then in this space, we also have different types of users. Maybe a shared login for a shared device on the manufacturing floor. Maybe we have different types of vendor access as well. Do you find these are also very neglected, like the general staff profile?
Yeah, the shared accounts get problematic because those are the ones that we typically see that kind of the creep in permissions, because you got a lot of different people using it, And then somebody that's using that account needs to do one thing, and now more people have access to that account, right? So it's those kind of things. The other part is really these days you need multi-factor on those critical systems. And that multi-factor really needs to be tied to a specific user or device, like something to isolate that in that second form or third, whatever form of authentication to make sure it's coming from, that access is coming from where you want it to be or who you want that to be from. It's really hard to do that in those shared environments. There's certainly there's times where you need shared accounts. Like that is just something that is very hard in a lot of manufacturing environments that we're working to completely move away from that because you have people moving around, right? Their workflow is disrupted at every single time. I go from this station to this station, and I got to go through a whole authentication process. And if that happens quite a bit during the day, that can be detrimental to the productivity of that company. So there's times where you have to do things to accommodate that workflow and keep the necessary security in place. There's things that you can do, but you got to be mindful of that. But there are ways to get around and still keep security on those shared accounts if we need, but move away from, like, I shouldn't say move away from it, but if you can move away from it for certain purposes or have some more specific, so it's not just like one generic account in all production, not good. But if it's like station, we see some times where it could be a specific station, production station that has its own login that you can kind of secure that work role too. You also mentioned like, service provider accounts. Mm-hmm. That's a huge one as well, because oftentimes those service provider accounts, they have to access some different things within the environment. Sometimes they'll have their own tools, and people just don't even look at that, right? They brought in a production machine and they get vendor support and they want to make it easy. So they give them admin rights and they got something on the server, and suddenly, like, when they're troubleshooting, they needed to go and adjust something on a server or this machine, and they need admin rights somewhere, and like, it never gets removed, right? Somebody just did it that one time, and they're not going back and auditing, what that needs and how should that be accessed. And so those kind of conversations need to happen periodically. Review, what's in place, what do they really need to be able to support your environment, and really tune that to the least possible access that they need, right? That least principle, right? The least privilege principle. Just adjust that down as much as you can, but it's oftentimes people are even having those conversations. It's just like they want to hand it off and move on, and hey, they can't do this, give more access, and then it's like, well, we never took that away, right? We resolved that issue, but remove that access. They don't need to have that, or making sure these remote access aren't persistent either. That's a huge thing. Yeah. They don't need to be online and third parties jump into your network and have access to everything at any given time.
I do feel like it's kind of this eternal struggle of you have your workflow, you have your shared workstation, and it's like, okay, we need to keep it secure at some level, but we also need to be able to efficiently do our job. And again, if you have a shared workstation, usually in a manufacturing facility, it's running one piece of software, two pieces of software. So you have this shared account signing into this workstation to use this one piece of software. Well, software has updates or software has changes to specific files, wherever those files lives locally on that computer. Okay, sometimes you need admin rights. So, okay, convenience. Let's just give it local admin rights, give that shared profile local admin rights so that they can make changes on the fly. So someone doesn't have to walk into the shop and use their admin account, type it in and make changes from there, because it results in some downtime, especially if you're in a busy season for your business. Like, people want to keep those machines, those CNC machines, those operators working 24/7. So it's just a struggle of, can we keep things running all the time and have no downtime, or do we need to keep it secure? And that's just a fight back and forth.
Yeah. Hey, Bo, can you just make sure you talk a little bit closer to Josh, because we're using that laptop microphone. I apologize to those listening. We're trying to figure out our broadcast functionality in our new space. But yeah, just a little bit closer would be a little bit better. But yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for all that, guys. So I guess what we're saying, though, is it just back to okay, we're going to have some shared users to be able to accommodate the workflows that we have throughout the facility, right? But
Yep.
like let's just get a list of what they are and how they're used, right? We're not saying eliminate it, but we're saying understand what they are, how they're used. Can we make some adjustments to that workflow to either eliminate or reduce the number of them? Just
Yeah, I
don't.
do feel like companies could almost like, we say we get this baseline by going through an onboarding, and some companies like looking to improve or get this baseline. It's almost like re-onboard yourself as a company. Like, let's just start from zero, figure out everything that we have in place as far as users and file structure goes, and then you can build up from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and so some other things that I think are noteworthy before we kind of get into the back end of this discussion on really how do we, reduce some of these or our exposure as a result of some of these things. Like, let's just touch on other things somewhat related, right? Multi-factor authentication. We talk about that all of the time. Some of the things that we could do when we have shared users because of workflow in these specific devices is segment the network, right? Even you cannot overstate this. Yes, everybody seems to be backing things up. Nobody's testing them. It seems like, I don't want to say nobody, but not many organizations still to this day are testing their backups. Like, you want to just touch on like how frequently you see this, or just affirm that I'm not just making these things up and this is real when you see it out in the wild.
You want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just starting with MFA in general, like it needs to be mandatory. It needs to be a default policy that's being turned on for every single account. Obviously, with shared workstations, you just run into issues. If you want to set up your MFA going to one single phone, well, that guy's out of the office. We got another guy in working on this machine. Well, now you have a problem. There's a couple different solutions to that. Sometimes you can set up MFA to multiple different phones. Depending on the situation, it can be a good solution. We've seen some companies use hardware tokens and keeping the hardware token close by in a secure area for that workstation or that CNC machine. That has worked out really well for some customers of ours. Um, Eliminating shared logins as much as you can would probably be most ideal. But again, we understand out on the floor, out on plant floor with the CNC machine, it's just kind of needs to happen sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Again, having MFA in place as default. Other things you shouldn't be doing without even considering it. I want to put SAT training there. Like you said already, test it, making sure you have backups in place, but also testing them regularly. That's something that's obviously just not done. We see time and time again. Just getting some type of standards in place as a company, just starting from the top and going, what are things we need to be implementing regardless, and then turning on those controls by default and making sure that they're enforced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything you'd like to add, Bo?
I think you got it covered.
So
a little bit.
So I just think, again, I go back to this so many times. I don't know if, and I don't know if it can be overstated. It is as simple as a hardware inventory, a software inventory, a user inventory. Like, not to use fancy CIS terms or any, like, just an inventory of those three things has to be the beginning of it.
I'd add one more to that, the data inventory. But most customers that we talk to, and it's getting worse all the time unless you go review it, because you have cloud solutions, you have local, you have like personal data is everywhere for companies. They're in all kinds of different systems, and it's people they don't have an idea of where their data is, how it's being protected, who has access. Right, kind of ties it together. The data is where the value is.
Yeah, and with data too, I feel like we've noticed a lot of SMBs, especially manufacturing companies, are kind of in this stage where there's all this file structure available in the cloud, and maybe it's appropriate to start moving some of this, migrating some of this on-premise data into the cloud, but we don't really know how to do that. Companies are just struggling with where to start, and what actually should remain on-prem in the file server and what should be moved. Usually, in terms of like CNC machines, you're going to have probably some designers on CAD programs who work, and those engineers will put their CNC designs, those files, into a shared folder location that the CNC workstation or machine has access to, and that's how they get their files to run for whatever projects they're working on. But then there's a lot of data now that you can just move into the cloud and have it MFA protected, and you don't need to worry about standing up a VPN and having users function off of that, which can open up convenience, but also more opportunities for bad actors to get into the environment.
It's where it's really important to have those platforms set up. They're designed for that workflow too. You have the security controls in place that you need. The workflow has been enhanced because of being able to use those cloud solutions. And then you also have, the correct data protections, either DLP, so you're not unexpectedly sharing some of the confidential or private information. And it's also being backed up and secured, and you can actually have some data lifecycle controls associated with it too. Things over a certain amount of time, you don't want to retain that data because that's additional risk. Hey, these solutions can actually manage that for us, reduces our overall security risk with potential data loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so I just think of know what you have in the form of those inventories that we talked about, so you can control what matters, which is kind of the theme of this show. So, at the end, like, you can reduce your exposure to the fallout from an event, right? Like we talk about left of boom, right of boom. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when is right of boom. You have some kind of incident happen. What is the fallout from that? Well, then if you do all these things, the blast radius of that event is going to be significantly reduced. Is you guys
Yeah,
with
me? I mean, we've talked multiple times about what a company's greatest threats are, and I feel like we would all say that it's going to be your users, your employees are probably the biggest threat, and it's going to be about some phishing email or compromise that happens. That's usually nowadays how bad actors are getting into environments, or what I've seen most of the time. So they get a hold of these credentials of this user. So what can we do as an IT team on the back end of things to make sure if there is this user's credentials getting hacked or taken advantage of, like how can we minimize the extra amount of damage that actor can do with those credentials? And that starts with this reviewing of permissions, like, okay, what should each of these users have access to, and just kind of working down, almost like simulating attacks and working down from there.
Yeah. So we're kind of getting to the end of the show here. I want to kind of jump to, the area where we call the lightning round, where we can just rifle off some thoughts, right? So maybe we start with you, Josh, or whoever wants this one. But basically, what is one sign that you see in an organization that's lacking the controls that we speak of?
Yeah, I feel like right away it would be a lack of an inventory. So, if leadership can't clearly identify who has access to what, or what data they actually have in their systems that they own, definitely starts with that top line.
Mm-hmm. Bo, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, it's certainly that, because that kind of just permeates throughout their whole IT process and plan, right? If they don't know what's there, they're going to have older infrastructure, they're going to have unmanaged data, there's risk everywhere. So it really goes down, like, if you don't know what's there, this stuff is just kind of running and it's completely unmanaged.
Yeah. All right. Well, so the next thing I'm going to throw at you guys is the first control to stabilize before anything else. Where would you go?
I mean, it's the inventories for sure. I mean, we've harped on that a lot, but then it's also, once once you have an idea of what's there, then it's making sure the security controls are in place and the necessary tool set for that layered security is in place. Um, you know, because then you can add that on there and keep it in an efficient manner as well. So, know what you have, and then you can add the protections on top of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, before we move on to the last one, I do like for those listening, it seems like we do labor over some of the same things over and over again, and that's really by design, right? Because it is like you have to just really pay attention to the most very basic things, and they do require, us to be repetitive around them so that people understand the importance of what we're talking about. So the last thing here for you guys. Fastest way to improve cyber readiness. Josh.
Yeah, I feel like that's coming up with standards right away, whether that's choosing and starting to implement a cybersecurity framework or even outside of that, just kind of sitting down with your C-suite and coming up with a set of standards, security based of what we need to have in place. And beyond that, like onboarding, offboarding, some of those other things that we've talked about. Deciding what you need to have in place process-wise is step one, and then step two is just going implementing that. But you can't start implementing and improving things until you decide what should be in place for your environment.
Yeah, I think, we kind of talk this fastest way to improve cyber readiness. I don't know if there's necessarily a real fast way to do it. There's a sequence, and an efficient way to do it is probably a better way to look at it. In understanding where your biggest risks are and addressing those. And the easiest thing I would say, the easiest way is to get a grasp on what you need to be doing. Certainly, there's a lot of tool set out there, in partnering with a provider that has that tool set and processes is going to be your fastest, most efficient way to get a baseline of protection in there. But it's also understanding the current threat landscape, where those risks are, and having a plan. Like there's no quick way to be protected, but there's the right way, and there's certain things that you start. There's a process or a workflow or we'll use like tracks of different initiatives to increase security in a customer's environment. It might be, like we talk about the inventory, then you're getting your data protections, your EDR, your security awareness training. Certainly there's some tools that are easy to implement that are going to improve overall organizational security. There are some things to start there, but it doesn't take you everywhere. There's certain times where, in order to get the right security controls in place, you may have to adjust workflows. It might be, organizational tools that are capable of providing the necessary security. Could be some network restructuring, firewalls, especially in manufacturing that have, a lot more managed devices just sitting on the network, making sure that those are segmented so you're not introducing risk there. I mean, there is just layers and layers of security that you need to be implementing. But if you do it in the sequence, the correct sequence, you can handle it and be able to efficiently work through it and make it manageable even for the smallest of customers.
Yeah, I mean, so that's awesome. So what you're saying is, it's not that it's super hard and complex. It's just that it has to be done over time with discipline, very similar to, hey, I want a healthier diet. Well, you can't just eat good one day or even 1 week. It needs to be every day, every meal, 3 meals a day, right? Or I want to be in better shape. You can't just go to the gym once a week, right? You got to go every day, and you got to be disciplined with it. We're the same concept here, right?
Yep.
But it is amazing if you do that in 12 months, you look back and you're like, I wasn't really sure how my business was going to be able to take advantage of me putting time and energies into this. But now, like, all of a sudden, things that you never even thought are going to have such a positive impact into your business. Any closing thoughts? All right. Well, thanks again. Thanks again for joining us today, gentlemen. Let's wrap it up with cybersecurity does not fail because organizations lack tools. It fails when the fundamentals are not consistently applied, as we labored over today. As expectations continue to rise, especially in manufacturing, organizations that focus on control, visibility, and consistency will be the ones that stay ahead. Thanks for joining us on Unscripted with SST, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.